Hey guys, Classic Gbody, and a little bit of an update here on the next project I'm working on. Got the 97 Z24 torn apart. This was the next project in line after I finished the Hearstals. So I guess what I'm going to do is just show you what I'm doing and kind of educate anyone who has never pulled a tranny out of a J-body before. I believe these cars are J-bodies, and I'll tell you one thing, it's not very fun. I mentioned that I had a transmission. The tranny in this car was bad. The electronics in the transmission went bad. The lockup torque converter had an issue, and car's got 150,000 miles on it. And I located a transmission that had only 70,000 on it. Came out of a wrecked car, so I figured I'd just replace the whole thing. And plus this tranny was slipping as well because electronics, it was messing with the valve body, so it was slipping. So I got it in the garage, got it all torn apart, got the tranny out of it, and real quick I'm just going to go over what needs to come apart on these cars to drop a transmission. It's not a fun job. I definitely prefer working on the old cars that I'm used to. I mean, I would have had a transmission out of one of my older cars in probably 30 minutes versus a couple evenings with this one, you know, but then again, I've never done this before. So what I did was started off by removing the airbox. Once that was removed, I was able to get to the bell housing bolts. There's 8 bell housing bolts, several across the top, a couple along the bottom, and there's a few that actually come in instead of threading in from the standard way through the transmission bell housing. There's a couple that came in from the back side, so I had to get a wrench in on the back side of the engine. It actually threads into the transmission itself. So the bolt that is underneath the exhaust manifold here, this one here on the bottom right here, that bolt threads in from the back side or through the engine block and threads into the transmission itself. And then on the bottom, got underneath the car, there's a stud that comes off of this one. It's got a good inch-long stud with a spacer on it with a nut, so that nut has to come off, and then you got to back the stud out in order to get to the flywheel bolts, because this little space right here, a little bit of a gap, I was able to get a wrench up in here to undo the flywheel bolts. So that stud has to come out, and there is actually, you know what, I'll show it to you real quick if I can find it. Yeah, here it is right here. Here's the stud that went in here. So that threaded in there like that, and then the end of the stud has a hex head on it, so you can unscrew the stud like that, and then you can get a wrench up in there to get those flywheel bolts off. So 8 total bolts, and 2 of them, one threads in from the back side through the engine block into the belt, into the transmission itself, and then one of the others has a stud in it. So just put that back in and leave it there. So those are all the bell housing bolts. Then on the other side of the transmission, there's 3 bolts for this mount that goes into the engine block. Loosen those up, and then the tranny mount itself. Tranny mount itself goes on the side of the transmission, also bolts through the body, and that bolts through the body right through here. Two bolts through here, and then the other 2 here and here. So those are all the bolts. I pulled the axles out. I pulled the struts out. Obviously, you got to disconnect the tie rod ends, the ball joints, pull the calipers off, You have to remove the engine cradle, which I'll show you in a minute. There's 6 bolts. One here, one there on the bottom of the body, and then along the bottom of the body there. Instead of pulling the cable through the bracket for the transmission shifter, I just removed the bracket from the transmission itself. When you pull the cradle down, you got to leave all the brake lines hanging up in here. Obviously, you don't want to remove the brake lines, and then there's a fuel line as well, the vent line. So that all hooks to the subframe. So you got to disconnect the power steering lines. Those power steering lines feed through here, because you pull the rack down with the subframe. So it's definitely not an easy task if you've never done it before. It's taken me a good couple of evenings trying to figure this thing all out, but that is basically it. I just dropped the transmission on a regular floor jack. You have to support the engine with one of those H-frames, and if you don't have one, you know, the dealerships have the H-frame. Since I don't, I just use my cherry picker to support it, and then so the engine isn't just sitting on the cherry picker while the tranny's out. I just have it sitting there on a board on the oil pan. So that's basically it. It is a lot of work. So 8 bolts on the bell housing, 3 on the passenger mount, then you got the driver side main mount. You pull the axles, remove the calipers, undo the ball joints, undo the tie rods, undo the 6 bolts for the subframe, pull the subframe down. You have to remove the power steering lines, and the tranny then comes out. Show the other side. Oh, you also got to remove the little dog bone that links the engine mount to the subframe. Little dog bone mount there. So you got to remove that as well. So that's it. So since everything's apart, I'm going to replace the struts. The car's got 150,000 on it. I'll replace the struts as a whole assembly, struts, springs, and bearing cap on the top. The tranny to go in it has new axle seals, new torque converter seals, new filter, gasket. Then let me just walk over to the subframe. I'll show you what happened, or what I discovered. There's the rack. Remove the rack from the subframe, because since it was out, I was going to clean this thing up and throw a coat of paint on it. Found out that, well, I wanted to replace the stabilizer bushings because they're split, and so I went along to the see this side here. Everything's intact. Went to the other side and got the good old Ohio rust. Subframe's rotted out on this car. That's where the stabilizer loop hooks in. Obviously there's nothing to hook into anymore. It's rotted out. The whole piece is gone here, and also right where the steering rack mounts, it's rotted as well. So obviously I'm going to have a friend weld this thing up. So yeah, not too happy about that. And while it's apart, I'm going to replace the lower control arms too. So just do it all at once. It'll make it easy. And also the car's got a leaky water pump. So since the tranny's out, I'll be able to get to that real easy, because you got to get to the water pump underneath the car, because the water pump's on the back side of the motor, because on the 2.4 the water pump's driven off the timing chain. So you gotta love compact front wheel drive cars. There's the water pump right there. So since the tranny's out of the way, it gives me plenty of room to work, but you can see it's leaking antifreeze. The drip right there. And same with the water neck is leaking too. So the good thing is everything's out of the way. Water neck's right here. Some drips on the bottom of that. So everything's out of the way. I can fix it correctly, not have to bitch and swear too much trying to get to everything. So once I do the water pump, water neck, I can and weld the subframe I can start putting everything back together. So this is the latest project. A little bit of an editorial of transmission removal on a Gbody Z24 Cavalier, and hope someone can maybe take this video and learn a little bit, because I had to actually go to the dealership and have one of my friends print off the order of operations here, because I thought I was able to get the transmission out without removing the subframe. It almost came out, but I needed about another inch of room to pull it down. So called him up and he said, yeah, you got to remove the subframe. So that's it, and I'll update you guys here in a little bit on my progress. And subscribe, keep the comments coming. I love it. Love talking to you guys, and I will see you in the next video.